Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about conflict and power. Really the overall theme of this chapter and of this section of the course is that conflict does not have to necessarily be negative. In fact, conflict is one of the fundamental ways that we can actually become closer to other people. The problem is it can feel really difficult as you're going through conflict. So a lot of times we just tend to avoid it. But conflict really is about turning what appears to be a negative into a positive. The key, though, is approaching conflict not from a sort of counterproductive approach. The key is to approach conflict with an idea that you can actually come out the other end better than you went in. When people handle power and conflict in selfish or unproductive ways, the results are always negative. But if you can approach conflict from a perspective of personal growth, then your relationships can be transformative and positive. Conflict and interpersonal communication is a really important part of this course and something that I'm personally passionate about. I worked with the Center for Public Deliberation in Fort Collins through Colorado State University for a long time, and that is really about communities coming together and trying to solve problems that affect the local community, and really is about kind of everyone coming together and saying, here's this conflict, what approaches can we take to all come out of it feeling like we were a part of this process and we can come out the other end feeling like we are okay with the solution to the problem. A big part of conflict resolution is shifting from blame, who's at fault here, to figuring out how you can solve the problem. And really let me back up just a little bit, we can define conflict in communication as just a process that occurs when people perceive that their goals are incompatible. So, or they feel like someone else is interfering with their ability to sort of achieve a personal goal. And obviously there's all different kinds of interpersonal goals, but any one of those goals, instrumental, relational, whatever it is, you kind of feel as though there's incompatibility or someone's getting in the way. It really is all about perception, right? Anybody that's ever been in a conflict where all of a sudden someone is upset with you and you're like, I didn't even know that this was a problem, right? It can tell you pretty clearly that conflict is all about perception, right? And it's not necessarily about something tangible that's happened, it's about someone else's perception of what has happened. And it really is a process. It's dynamic. It occurs in moments in time, just like all of interpersonal communication. And so it's really important to remember that just because one moment of a conflict may seem really difficult or really challenging, doesn't mean the next moment might be a breakthrough where you can sort of come to a better resolution. A lot of interpersonal conflict and relationship arise from irritating behaviors that the other person is exhibiting, disagreement about relational rules. So this is like, how much chores or how much housework each person is expected to do, things like that. And then just personality clashes. One person's really loud, the other person's quiet, right? That's going to be maybe a source of conflict. And the other major aspect of conflict that is really important to remember is that power is always embedded in sort of conflict resolutions, conflict situations, and probably resolutions as well. Power is always present. It's not something that we can necessarily get away from. Power really is an important part of how we relate to other people. The dyadic power theory is the idea that people who have only moderate amounts of power are more likely to use it in a controlling way, whereas the people that have a high level of power, a more low level of power, are less likely to use it like that. But people with high power feel little need to display it, and they know that they'll most likely get their way, so it's not as necessary to kind of flex those muscles. You can see this with like mid-level managers versus your boss. Those mid-level managers are going to be much more controlling than your bosses are going to be much more sort of open to collaboration and things like that. Obviously, power can be used ethically or unethically, but it's important to remember that power is always kind of embedded in our conflict resolutions and our conflict situations. And we can use power. There's a lot of different, your book talks about power currencies. So, resources, expertise, social networking, personal and intimacy currency. These are all different sort of, you know, things that we can kind of use in order to get our way or negotiate in a conflict situation. So people with more, intimacy currency or expertise currency are more likely to sort of get their way in a conflict situation. But really, all different things influence how we relate to conflict situations. You'll want to read in your book and in the lecture notes about differences in terms of culture and gender. But there's 5 different ways of handling conflict that I want to just briefly go over here for the remainder of the video, and that you'll want to really focus on in the book. So the first is avoidance, and this is just the one that we always tend to use. We sort of can snip at each other and kind of skirt around the issue. The 2 sort of major ways that we can avoid conflict. We're still sort of acknowledging that it's there, but we don't engage it directly in any way. It's, like I said, the most common, and it's generally not a very productive strategy for handling conflict. Although if emotions are really, really, really high and you feel like you might say something that you would regret, sometimes it can be just a better idea to say, you know what, let's take a step back, let's not deal with this or talk about this right now, and let's come together in a few hours when maybe emotions are less high. The second is accommodation, and this is just where one person just acquiesces and says and abandons their goals or their sort of stance and just gives in and lets the other person win. Obviously, there's usually some power imbalance there. So one person's probably, the person that's giving up is usually probably in a position of lesser power. And in like, say, a romantic relationship, when I talk about power, it's not always like one person has the power and the other person doesn't. It can go back and forth. And obviously different situations, different types of relational currency is going to be relevant. And so you'll have, different sort of balances there. But yeah, love can cause a combination, and it can actually be a really a healthy characteristic of a healthy relationship. So if you kind of give in and say, you know what, my goal isn't important as you fulfilling your goal in this situation, and that can be a really healthy thing that can happen. Competition is one that masculine actors are really encouraged to engage in, and this is just where you sort of have an open and clear discussion of goals, and the person that wins, you go into it thinking one person's going to win and one person's going to lose, and there really is kind of a disregarding of the other person's needs and goals in favor of your own. So it's really kind of it's a difficult thing, because especially in an interpersonal relationship that you want to last, this type of thing is going to maybe make it more difficult to sort of collaborate later or feel as though your needs and goals are being recognized by the other person. This is where you get a lot of defensive communication, ad hominems like, oh, well, you're stupid. Just like it can get really negative. And this is really where, as a sort of Western individualistic culture, this is kind of how we view conflict. And this is why we don't like conflict, right? Because you got to win. And if you don't win, then you lose. So that is the big way that we often think about conflict. Reactivity, this is communications that's really reactive and emotionally explosive. This is also where you just don't recognize the other person's desires as at all relevant. And this is also kind of where power, you can really see how power is flexed. There's really a lack of respect here. So you really kind of react, and it's kind of the next level to competition. And then the last is collaboration. And this is generally regarded as the most productive form of communication in interpersonal conflicts. And this is really about treating conflict as a problem-solving adventure. This is where you sit down together, you each discuss your sides of the issue, you attempt to find some kind of common ground. You think that I should do the dishes, I think you should do the dishes. We both want the dishes done, right? That's establishing common ground. And really kind of try to find a solution that will benefit both people. Well, why don't we do them together, right? Problem solved. Or you wash the dishes and I'll dry them. It's a very silly example, but it shows how you're not just like win or lose. You do the dishes versus I do the dishes. Well, I do the dishes all the time. Well, you're lazy, right? That would absolutely be much more of like a competition style conflict engagement versus a collaboration where you really try to find a mutual solution to the problem. There's a lot of different gendered and cultural conflict patterns that change, and you'll want to read in your book about the specifics of those. I won't have a whole lot of time in this video, but approaching conflict from a collaborative approach will have long-lasting benefits on your relationships, and that's just what the studies show, that people are relationally and individually happier individuals if they adopt a more collaborative approach to communication in conflict situations. So that's all for today. I'll see you next time.